Well, good morning, boys. Hugh Halter here at the Halter Farmstead, Rye Dog Farm as we call it. I wanted to take you across the driveway to what we call the Elkhorn Saloon. And I'm going to take you inside right now. We've been doing some work on this thing for quite a while. And this is a big deal to me. This has always been a big deal to me, but this one took about 6 months. This was an old... I think where they held the wheat. It was built in 1837, but you can kind of get a little bit of a feel. We got a little fireplace down here. We'll be setting up. Got assorted tap handles from all my world's travels, and we're just walking around here. Had a little bender last night with some of the guys. Little picture of my boy, Rye Dog. Old Irish saying, an old Irish curse, may those who love us, and those who don't love us, may God turn their hearts. If you can't turn their hearts, may he turn their ankles, so we'll know them by their limping. I think that's in the Bible somewhere. But still going around the horn here. We've got more tap handles. I'm kind of into golf, so there's a little golf picture. Things over the years that I've picked up, and then of course we get to, you know, I guess the center of the cinnamon roll. That's the old, I think that's also an 1860 mantle that I've carried with me for years. Of course, the Irish flag representing my people, some other stuff. So it's in disarray this morning, but I wanted to chat with you guys because we're talking about the Holy Spirit. So why not talk about partying? But let me see if I can get this set up. No, but seriously, we've got a couple weeks left, and then we go into summer break. And we really have been kind of angling towards the Holy Spirit a bit with a few little messages from the book of Acts. And just a couple things that maybe you know or you don't know, but in the Greek language and Hebrew, mostly Hebrew, whenever the Spirit is mentioned, it's generally like a feminine... I don't know the exact lingo, but it's within the language is kind of a feminine orientation of the language. So a lot of people joke or don't joke about the Holy Spirit being much more of the woman related to God. God, of course, creates us in his image, both male and female. So, but the Holy Spirit is that part of God that tends to be kind of the nurturing, moving, creates sensitivity in us, if you will. And I think it's important as we talk about, you know, just kind of going into the summer, like the idea, in fact, in a couple of weeks, I want to talk to you about living the intuitive life. And the intuitive life is about your ability to wake up without any other input and to know what the voice of the Lord is saying for you to do. It's maybe the most important thing for all of us to develop. But one of the things as we go through the book of Acts is this incredible sort of telling of the story of normal people. Now, again, when you think of normal, don't think of us in 2022. This was written to people that were just barely north of caveman, at least in their orientation, all right? So these are not highly educated, most of them. And even if they were highly educated, they don't know anything that you and I have known or learned after about the third grade. I mean, their extent of their knowledge was very limited compared to ours. So, you know, literally think about the most unlearned people you've ever been around. Maybe it's in a third world country or something like that, where they had no access to any sense of learning or watching what was going on in the rest of the world. They had no context for that. They were just stuck in their own little idea of what life was. And that's what this is being written to. And so the book of Acts is so powerful for us because it shows us what God can do with absolutely normal people when the Spirit empowers them, okay? And it's the Spirit. It's this, again, this beautiful, whimsical, creative essence of God that comes around us daily, hourly, and it guides us into his truth and into the way of life he wants us to live. And so about in the middle of the book, third of the way through, is chapter 10, one of my favorites. And it's really about It's kind of what has inspired me over the years to create spaces where men can talk. And I've just learned, even though, you might have picked up on the fact that there is some booze around here. Booze actually gets used way less than you'd think around here. We have a lot of friends that struggle with alcoholism, and so we call parties and we put the booze away, and we just love on these guys without that. And then there's other men that it seems to help to pour a couple fingers of a 15-year something, and it just kind of lets things go. It releases something when men can actually eat and drink together, whether it's chocolate milk or whatever it is. But I've just learned that like these little spaces that we create are sacred, and it's where the Spirit moves. I've had more powerful talks. Even last night I had a guy over, and pastor barely hanging on there. His church has been struggling for years. He doesn't even know why he's in it anymore. And just having time with him in here. Like if I take him into my house where my wife's at and the hockey game's playing, something doesn't happen. It's small talk. But somehow when you get guys to like sit there together and enjoy some food and to look in each other's eyes and talk about real things, those are sacred spaces, and it changes the church. It changes people. So in Acts 10, this is one of the passages that literally changed the church. Before this, just so you have some history, the Jesus movement was a racist movement. It was perceived to be for Jews only. If you hear any scratching noise, it's some sort of a cross between a rodent and a pterodactyl. I can't find it. It's in the walls somewhere in here, but don't let it throw you off. But anyway, so chapter 10, it's Jews only. Jews are only eating with Jews. The idea of being spiritual was really related to who you ate with and who you drank with, and who you didn't eat with and who you didn't drink with. And so we're going to get a story of Peter, who's obviously one of the early church leaders, and he still doesn't know it's for people outside of his own context. And so chapter 10, it says at Caesarea there was a man named Cornelius. He was a centurion in what was known the Italian regiment. So those would have been the bad guys, remember? Those are not Jews. Those are the ones that are oppressing the Jews. And he and all of his family were devout and God-fearing, and he gave generously to those in need and prayed to God regularly. A little bit of an idea of why it's sacred when you eat with men is that you don't really know their story. You make assumptions about people until you actually get time to hear their story. And so no Jew would have thought that this Roman centurion would have actually been a God-fearer, or that God would be interacting with his life. And yet, here's what we read. One day about 3 p.m, he had a vision. And he distinctly saw an angel of God who came to him and said, Cornelius. And Cornelius stared at him in fear and said, "What is it, Lord?" he asked. And the angel said, "Your prayers and gifts to the poor have come up as a memorial offering before God. Now send men to Joppa to bring back a man named Simon, who is called Peter. And he is staying with Simon the tanner, whose house is by the sea." And so this story happens. Now, about the same time, it says about noon the following day, as they were on their journey approaching the city, Peter went up on the roof to pray, and he became hungry and wanted something to eat while he was in the, that's classic, right? Like you pull off to have a little devotional time, and you start thinking about a bag of kettle chips, and it diverts the sacred moment. So don't ever feel bad if that's you. Here's happening to Peter. And so as he was in this process, it says he falls into a trance. And he saw heaven open up and something like a large sheet being let down to earth by its 4 corners. So what type of large sheet might it be? Maybe like a tablecloth just floating down. And on it contained all types of 4-footed animals, as well as reptiles and birds of the air. And these obviously were all the foods that a young Jewish boy was taught. You never eat, and if you do, you're not very spiritual, and you're offending God. And so the voice comes in the vision, and it says, "Peter, get up, kill, and eat." And he says, "Surely not." Peter replied, "No, I'm a good Christian Presbyterian boy. I'm not going to do that." And all of a sudden, the vision comes over 2 more times. So God has to give him the same vision 3 times. The idea that, hey, this stuff is okay to eat now. Like, it's all right. So it says it happened 3 times, and immediately the sheet was taken back into heaven. And then while Peter was wondering about the meaning of the vision, the men that were sent by the centurion, they're all of a sudden outside Peter's gate. They would have stopped at the gate because in those days, if you were trying to show respect, you would never knock on the door. That would almost be like a violent act. And so they stood respectfully at the gate, and they called out, and Peter's up there trying to think through the vision, and the Holy Spirit has to say, hey, Peter, quit overthinking it. Would you just go down and greet these men? And so it says this happened. And then all of a sudden it said, and so Peter invited the men into the house to be guests. And you would just read right by this, but guys, this is one of the most sacred moments in the book of Acts, where normal men do amazing supernatural things that change the course of history, is that he invites them into the home. And you guys have heard this, that in Eastern hospitality, when you invite somebody into the house, you're literally saying, these people are accepted to me. Like, I no longer judge them. And so you give them food, and you give them drink, and you give them safety. And if they need to spend the night, you let them spend the night, maybe even a week or two, whatever they need. And so something happens in Peter's heart hanging out with these guys. So just remember that something happens in Peter's heart by hanging out with these guys. And so then they go up the next day. It says that they decide to go up and meet Cornelius the Centurion. And so if you've ever read or seen the movie My Big Fat Greek Wedding, this is kind of the picture of that, where all these Romans the word would have got out through the centurion, hey, I'm going to have Peter and these other Jewish boys over for dinner. And the house, it said, was jammed full of people. People could not imagine that a Roman and a Jewish man would sit down together. And so Peter and the guys head up there, and it says that Peter enters the house, and Cornelius, this huge centurion stud, falls to the ground in sort of honor of Peter. Not sure why. Either the Holy Spirit told him that this guy is important to what God's doing in the world, but he falls down. Peter changes his mindset, and he looked at this man in front of all of this man's guests, and he said, hey, bro, just stand up. You're but a man just like me. Like, we're the same. That's why men meeting with men is so sacred. It's not one guy fixing another guy. It's when we're together, we don't have to actually pretend anymore. We can just like be ourselves. And so this happens, and it says the man stood up, and all of a sudden Peter shares really the full gospel story with this entire house full of people. And it said that they responded, and at the end of it, Peter said, how can we not, well, I'll read it. It says, this is in verse 44, while Peter was still speaking these words, the Holy Spirit, okay, Holy Spirit, when you're sitting there talking with a buddy and you just go, I don't even know if what I'm saying is helping, all of a sudden a light bulb goes on, or a softening of the heart, or a veil or blinders come off eyeballs. It says, while Peter was speaking these words, the Holy Spirit came on all who heard the message. And the circumcised believers who had come with Peter were astonished that the gift of the Holy Spirit had been poured out even on the Gentiles, for they heard them speaking in tongues and praising God. And all of a sudden, boom, and the church changed. It goes from Jewish only to, it starts to go over the entire world. And what set that off was 2 men that invited other men into their house. And in those sacred moments, whatever it is, it could be a 1830 wheat house that you turn into a saloon. It can be an outdoor space that you create. That's I've been in a few of your homes. You have fantastic hospitality spaces. Like, whatever you do that creates a space for men to be in and to talk about what they're really going through, those literally might be the most Holy Spirit-driven spaces that you can create. Sometimes I'll tell people that evangelism is not really what we say with our mouth. Oftentimes space making is evangelism. It's creating the atmosphere for dudes to come clean and to come together. And so I'm just thinking, you know, as we head into summer, a couple thoughts. We'll talk about intuitive living next time, but maybe this week, I just want you to think about not taking the summer off, but recognizing that the summer gives you unique opportunities. It's a little bit less stressful. And so it's sometimes easier to invite guys to spend a day together out fishing or on the golf course, or at least lock it into a weekly breakfast at a local diner. But whatever it is, don't take the summer off. Actually take it on. And if you want to do a renovation project in your house to create a better hospitality, that'd be a fantastic, sacred thing that you can put your hands to. And maybe you invite buddies in and you say, hey, let's make a killer fire pit out in the backyard or whatever it is. But make creating spaces a move of the Spirit in your life, and I think you'll just see amazing, at least really fun results. So love you guys. We'll see you next week.